Very, very warm welcome to everybody. This is season 5, episode 22 of Conservation Conversations. And it's a pleasure to have so many of you tuning in from all across the world. It's really, really fantastic. I mean, there's Hamburg, there's the Netherlands, and it's truly, truly phenomenal to see how far and wide Conservation Conversations reaches every single episode. And of course, I want to just reiterate the fact that we have over 160 of these episodes available at your fingertips. One only need to go to the YouTube channel, BirdLife South Africa. You like, you subscribe, and you can catch up on anything that you have missed insofar as these episodes are concerned. And of course, we value feedback, and we really want to make sure that the word about these webinars gets out there. So BirdLife South Africa values the feedback, of these episodes, and we want to know whether or not you're enjoying them. And we want you to share the message as far and wide as possible. So please do contact us and share some of your highlights from these conservation conversations episodes on our social media platforms. There are all the links from Facebook through to X and even Instagram. Please do make sure that you share the news. And we do these webinars free of charge. And so if you feel the urge to donate any form of money towards this initiative, it would be greatly appreciated. It does take some time and effort. We have some truly phenomenal guest speakers that devote their time and efforts to this webinar series. And so any form of support would be greatly appreciated. If you feel that urge now, you may simply scan the QR code on the screen before you. And then a very exciting event that we have coming up, Flock to Marion Again 2025. If any of you 300 participants have yet to book onto this extraordinary opportunity to head south into the Southern Oceans on a voyage promising to deliver many hundreds of thousands of birds, I would strongly recommend that you sign up to do so. Bookings are rapidly escalating as we fast approach the date, and you really don't want to find yourself in a position where you are missing out on what promises to be something truly remarkable. I look forward to it, and I look forward to seeing many familiar and new faces on board this trip. Of course, we have our ongoing raffle, and it's our annual BirdLife South Africa raffle. And one stands a chance to win a birding trip for 2 people to Brazil worth 150,000 rands. So in the event that you would like to support us in our annual jackpot, please do make sure that you sign up for the raffle. It is only 650 Rand per ticket, and there are only 1,000 tickets. And a little birdie did tweet in my ear just the other day in a staff meeting that these entries are starting to rapidly close. So make sure that you get your hands on to a ticket. Now, moving on to this evening's presentation, we have our very own Jess Wilmot. And Jess is going to be talking us through a topic that has found its way into the hearts of many South African and international birder because of the very purpose behind the work that is being done here and the cross-border implications as well. It's been truly fantastic following the journey. And so let me take a moment to introduce Jess, who has just made herself visible. Good evening, Jess.
Good evening, all. Excited but nervous to be here.
This is Jess's first appearance on Conservation Conversations. And yeah, Jess, I was equally as nervous. And thankfully, we have a very understanding bunch of participants. And I think they are overly excited at the prospect of what lies in wait this evening. But let me take a moment to introduce you. Jess is our Flyway and Migrants Project Manager here at BirdLife South Africa. From a young age, Jessica was determined to work either with animals or in nature, and she grew up in Jonkershoek in Stellenbosch. She knew that conservation was her calling after attending the open day for the Conservation Ecology Department at Stellenbosch University. She soon realized that her purpose was set. After university, she worked with mammals in Namibia and Botswana. It's okay, Jess, we'll forgive you. And upon returning to South Africa, Jessica found her calling at an elephant conservation organization focused on studying the movements of elephants between South Africa and Mozambique. She loves wild spaces and the peace that they bring, and she's had the opportunity to pursue her master's degree in Europe, which was an incredible adventure that broadened her knowledge in environmental sciences and allowed her to truly appreciate the African bushveld upon returning home. In June of 2023, she joined BirdLife South Africa not as an overly ambitious birder, which I believe Jess that has changed, although Jess refuses to admit the fact that she keeps her lists. But that is a different webinar. It's a challenge to be strategic in her efforts to protect them, but she is embracing this new chapter and enjoying working with a variety of bird life partners. Jess, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here this evening. Thank you so much. And I have no doubt that every single person here looks forward to what you have to share with us. If you wouldn't mind sharing your screen.
Great. So thank you, John, for the very enthusiastic introduction. And I remain committed to not starting a bird list. We'll see in a few years' time. But my ID skills are definitely improving. So yeah, like I said, I am excited to be here to be able to talk about migratory birds and more specifically the European Roller Project. Yeah, Hera has really crept into our hearts, as John has said, and we look forward to seeing the project grow from year to year. So I thought we'd kickstart the presentation by just taking a second to appreciate how far our understanding of bird migration has evolved. We are in an exciting chapter with a continued advancement of technology, which is allowing us a deeper understanding of the mysteries of migration, which is allowing us to contribute to effective conservation strategies. And although we still have a lot to learn, we have definitely come very far from the original theories, which were based on many interesting myths, from swallows hibernating in crevices, some winter and summer residents being the same birds but different plumage. Others said that swallows were hibernating in mud at the bottom of lakes and streams. Others theorized that birds were migrating to the moon for winter. It was only when in 1822, a white stork impaled with a 30-inch spear linked to a region in Africa was found outside a village in Germany that these theories slowly started evolving to what it is today. It further expanded with the first bird banding that was initiated in 1899. Furthermore, with radio telemetry tracking being introduced in the 1960s. And then finally, in the 1980s, satellite tracking made an appearance using the Argos satellite system, which is something many of us still deploy today. So other than the intrinsic value that migratory birds do provide, what's their larger role within the ecosystem? So we have an understanding of their role as pollinators, seed dispersers, pest control agents, to name a few. But migratory birds are also what we call ecological indicators. So by monitoring the trends of these species, it provides us this unique window into the health of the various habitats and resources that they're dependent on for survival. So if you think of a bird traveling thousands of kilometers, not only are they going to be exposed to a variety of threats, but they're also reliant on a variety of sites and resources to survive. So by monitoring these populations, if we notice that there's a decline, it generally indicates that there's a problem along the route that they're flying. And a lot of times, migratory birds are actually indicating a problem before we become aware of it. So South Africa, being a mega biodiverse country, we are host to over 100 migratory bird species, long distance and intra-African. So we really have this unique opportunity to contribute to this growing body of knowledge. As we all know, the planet is undergoing mass rate of change, which is resulting in biodiversity loss. But what does this mean for migratory birds? As you can imagine, with them being dependent on a variety of habitats throughout the world, many species are experiencing population decline because of loss of resources, poaching, pesticides, and loss of habitat and climate change, to name a few. But migratory birds and the impact of climate change is twofold. So not only are they having to adapt to the physical environment changing, but they also having to adapt to something called phenological or ecological mismatch. And this mismatch happens when the timing of key life events, so breeding, migration, or food availability, is out of sync due to environmental changes. So we know birds are very sensitive and use environmental cues to know when to do what within their life cycle, with the understanding that if they start a certain process, let's say breeding, that there is going to be resource abundance because that's how it's co-evolved. But let's say a bird starts migrating back to its breeding ground from South Africa earlier than what it originally would have because it's becoming warmer sooner or colder sooner, sorry, then they get to their breeding site, potentially when it's still frozen, so there's no food available for them, or it's fine, they start breeding with understanding that as soon as the chicks hatch, there's going to be a flush of insects, but that's not necessarily the case because insects haven't required or needed to adapt to the change in climate. So this lack of resources is having an impact not only on the survival of the chicks, so either they don't survive or they're very weak, so they don't successfully complete their first annual migration. And it's also influencing the fitness of the adults because they're having to share the limited resources that's available, or they having to start a second clutch because their first clutch didn't survive. The challenge with this impact is that it's very difficult to mitigate or predict. The only thing we can really do is monitor it, which is why it's so vital for citizen scientists to report these mass mortality events of migratory birds. And if many of you will think back in October last year when we had this weird cold spell as soon as the aerial feeders arrived, many of you, and thank you for that, were reporting the mortality events of bee eaters and swallows. So now that we know that there's this decline, what else is there that we should take note of? So in 2014, they did a study and found that Afro-Palearctic long-distance migrants are actually declining faster than short-distance migrants and sedentary species. And not to go into the science, but referring to graph A, the line at the bottom is referring to long-distance migrant species, whereas the top is referring to short-distance migrant species. And the difference shows that the long distance is declining at a quicker rate. They then took it a step further and compared farmland long-distance migrant species, in which European rollers fall, and non-farmland long-distance migrant species. And they found that farmland long-distance migrant species is also declining at a faster rate than non-farmland species. They found in this decline, or the big rates of change, they found two big losses or times in the timeline where there were these big declines. The first one was from 1970 to 1990, and then the second one, to a lesser degree, was from 1990 to 2000. The greatest decline between this first period was actually among birds that winter in open savannas and breed on agricultural land. The general decline was attributed to conditions affecting the species in their wintering grounds and their passage area. The study also then looked to identify key knowledge gaps by examining the extent of published evidence for factors affecting these species. So essentially, they were trying to see, has research taken place to understand what is resulting in these population declines? And without going into the graphs, in general, the analysis found that we have a far better understanding of threats to migrants during their breeding season than what we have during their non-breeding season. So this study really emphasized the need to improve our understanding of the ecology, distribution, and habitat use of migratory birds outside of their breeding season in order to develop effective holistic conservation strategies. So now that we know what the challenge is, we have an opportunity to ask, well, how can we help? It is a bit daunting to really even try and understand where you need to focus your limited efforts. For migratory birds, they're traveling thousands of kilometers over various political borders. different capacities within the countries and priorities and agendas. But what we do know is that protecting a species during only part of its life cycle holds very little conservation value, which is why in 2015, a bunch of BirdLife partners, together with BirdLife South Africa, got together and came up with this flyway-wide approach to conservation. This approach essentially tries to coordinate conservation efforts across the species' entire life cycle, as well as within the routes that the migratory species use. And this route that I refer to is what we term flyways. And you can just imagine it as these massive highways in the skies that various species use depending on where they breed. It's not set in stone. Some species use different flyways, or they cross over. There's always a rogue individual that uses a completely different flyway. But it just helps us coordinate our efforts to know where to work, where to focus, and which partners and countries to work with. So globally, we have 4. South Africa sits within the African Eurasian Flyway, which is the one that's highlighted in green. But you can see it's still very broad and doesn't really help us focus our very limited resources, which is why they've now divided it into 2. We have the East Atlantic Flyway on our west coast. That was actually the first flyway that was established. And then we have the new flyway on our east coast called the Eastern African Eurasian Flyway. It's a mouthful and lots to remember, but I'll be referring to it as we go. So BirdLife South Africa established its first long-distance migratory bird study using the iconic European roller as the flagship for this project. It's a charismatic species, much loved amongst birders. When it arrives. We are also host to both subspecies, Garrulus and Seminawi, and those subspecies breed in 2 different regions in the Northern Hemisphere and essentially use 2 different flyways to get to South Africa. Why is this research important, though? And why did we choose the European roller as our first project for long-distance migrant studies? And the answer is twofold. So with the establishment of the East Atlantic Flyway, they chose 6 flagship species. And a flagship species also acts as an ambassador for the whole concept. But a lot of research has taken place in the breeding grounds. Those breeding grounds actually sits within the East Atlantic Flyway. So that's the one reason we decided to choose the European roller. And the second reason is when they noticed this massive decline in the breeding sites, in 2017, they developed a flyway action plan. And this action plan essentially sets out conservation actions required to reverse the population decline. And in this plan, they also highlighted that South Africa is a very important wintering ground for the population, but there are big knowledge gaps that prevents, this holistic conservation strategy. They theorize that Garrulus, so the subspecies occurring mostly in Europe, is declining at a faster rate than Seminawi, but we don't have enough data to confirm that. When they noticed that there's a decline in the breeding sites, they found that the biggest reason was because of agricultural expansion and loss of natural breeding sites or cavities, which is why they started putting up a lot of artificial nest boxes in Europe. So essentially, they skewed research in the breeding grounds. So the map in the middle shows just that. And there are 2 things to take note of. So all those lines, these are migratory routes of the individuals that were tagged. So all these little dots are individuals, European rollers that had a satellite tracker on them. And these are the routes that they flew to travel to the overwintering grounds in Southern Africa. But none of those individuals, interestingly, traveled as far south as South Africa. So we still don't know what is happening to the population overwintering in South Africa. The second thing to note, and referring back to the flyways, those individuals essentially traveled within the East Atlantic Flyway. So we don't have any information on the individuals traveling within the Eastern African Eurasian Flyway, so the flyway sitting along our east coast. So 4 knowledge gaps were identified, the one being the migration routes. So we don't know where the population is coming from that overwinters in South Africa. Linked to that, we don't have an understanding of the key staging or stopover sites used during migration. And to explain a staging site, and I'll refer back to it when we look at Hera's migration, but if you think of you going on a road trip, you need to stop for fuel and food. Birds or migratory birds essentially have the same needs. So they need these areas to rest and refuel before they can continue their journey. And without knowing where those sites are, we can't, direct our resources, ensure that those sites are protected, because without protecting them, it's going to influence their fitness and their ability to complete these migrations. The third knowledge gap is we have very little understanding on the habitat preferences within Africa and how much of that is actually protected. So we have a rough idea, thanks to SABAP2 and all the atlasing and citizen scientists like yourself contributing to monitoring projects, but we don't have an understanding of what is their preferred habitat and how much of that is protected, because that has implications for climate change. And, if we see that very few of the preferred habitat types are actually protected, that's something we need to work towards, expanding that percentage. Then the last knowledge gap is we don't have an understanding of the population trends in Africa. We know it fluctuates, but we don't have a strong database to confirm what is happening to the population to contribute to conservation efforts. So the project in South Africa comprises of two components. We have the ground monitoring, which uses bird lasser and transect point count protocol to understand the population trends and habitat preferences. And then that's complemented with the exciting satellite tracking to understand the migration routes and staging sites of the overwintering population from South Africa. So now I have the exciting bit of being able to introduce you to Hera and Royal Wasi. We don't want to forget about Royal Wasi. So these are South Africa's first satellite tracked European rollers. And when I say first, I really mean first. Referring back to that map, none of those individuals traveled as far south as South Africa, and we've never deployed a satellite tracker onto the species. And she really has become an ambassador for this project, and we are thrilled that people have become so invested in her journey. So their story essentially started for us in Thorny Bush Nature Reserve in Limpopo. It's a private protected area west of Kruger, part of this greater Kruger landscape. We were hosted and assisted by Royal Malawan, which is a private lodge in that area. They are great supporters of BirdLife South Africa. And we had two goals in mind: to deploy 2 solar-powered satellite trackers and to ring as many individuals as possible. Now, you might ask why only 2? That's so few, and we know that. Statistically, we want to aim to deploy 6 trackers, but they are very expensive. So last year, we only had money for 2, but next year we aim to deploy more. The team comprised of myself, a wildlife vet to monitor the health of the individual as well as to take biosamples. And then we had the infamous Craig Natras, very experienced bird ringer with lots of experience placing trackers on a variety of species. And then the Royal Malawan guiding team, who were instrumental in helping us find the few individuals that we did see on the reserve. So the outcome, massive learning curve. This was the first time for BirdLife South Africa and Craig to trap for European rollers. So we used a flap trap baited with superworms. We only saw 11 individuals in the 48 hours that we were there, which is a very low number, and definitely added to the challenge of trapping them. We did find that the individuals were very wary of this foreign object in a pristine environment. So it will actually be interesting to see the behavior of individuals that you find on, let's say, like telephone poles along a public road where there's more litter. So we only managed to catch 2 individuals despite setting the trap over 30 times. So even though that's a very low success rate, we still managed to deploy the solar-powered satellite trackers, which was a massive goal. One part of the learning curve was seeing that the preferred prey at the time was grasshoppers, because that's what was in abundance in the field. So we have actually expanded our ethical clearance to include grasshoppers next season. So we'll see if that makes any difference and if that's still the preferred prey next season. So the field work encompass taking measurements to age the individual as well as to weigh them to ensure that they were the right body weight to deploy the tracker. So BirdLife South Africa aligns with the ethical recommendation of only deploying a tracker that weighs 3% or less of the body mass of the individual. We took blood samples to look at the subspecies or to test for the subspecies as well as the sex. And then the solar-powered satellite tracker, only weighing 3.2 grams, was attached using Teflon strapping and a backpack-style attachment. So it really is like a little backpack. It sits on the back, and the Teflon strapping crosses over on the chest, and we secure the strapping so that there isn't a lot of abrasion. The antenna is extremely flexible, and the tracker was secured with a metal clip. We also marked each individual with a uniquely coded coloring. So if you ever see a European roller with a bright blue coloring coded with an asterisk at the end, it's part of our project, and we will be extremely grateful if you, share the location and the details of that sighting. Okay, so based on the samples collected, we can confirm that Hera is a female, age 6. Don't ask me about the aging technique. Full confidence in Craig's ability to do that. But Hera was older. She weighed a bit less than Royal Wasi. But Royal Wasi, being 4 years old, weighing a bit less, his body measurements were actually bigger than Hera. We're still waiting for the genetic confirmation. So we're working with SAMBI, the South African Biodiversity Institute, and their biobank to confirm the subspecies. But based on the route that these birds flew, we can make a few assumptions as to what subspecies we actually tagged. So what happened next? So we deployed the trackers on the 7th of March. Both individuals stayed in Thorny Bush for 3 or 4 weeks longer. Hera was the first to set off on the 30th of March, whereas Royal Wasi stayed about 2 weeks longer. And then referring back to the different flyways, so the map on the left is the global flyways, and the map on the right is the movements of the two individuals. And you can see that their movements aligns to the Eastern African Eurasian flyway, which encompasses the breeding habitat of the Seminawi subspecies. Right, so sticking with Royal Wasi, and I'm referring to this purple line. So he traveled along the east coast of Africa, more specifically through northern Mozambique, through southern Malawi, through Tanzania, along the coast of Kenya to reach Somalia in only 6 days, which is an incredible feat. That's over 5,000 kilometers in just 6 days. So after he got to Somalia, he was there for 14 days, slowly edging towards the Horn of Africa. And you can see there was definitely some interaction between the two individuals. They probably had a little bit of a reunion in Somalia. But from the 30th of April onwards, we received no new updates from his tracker. We can make assumptions as to what happened. Technology failing is a risk that we are going to have to contend with again. The bird could have been predated, could have been hunted. That is something that a threat that they do face. We do take comfort in the studies that our European partners have done at their breeding sites to make sure that the tracker doesn't have a negative impact or a detrimental impact on the survival of the bird. So we don't think the tracker had any impact or negative impact on Royal Wasi. So we can hold thumbs and just hope that the tag has failed. Maybe we are surprised and see him again in Thorny Bush. If that is the case, we'll make a concerted effort to retrap him so that we can remove the tracker and send it back to the manufacturer to see what went wrong. But yeah, it's a massive loss for the project, not only because the tag is expensive, but because, he traveled 5,000 kilometers in only 6 days. So it would have been incredible to see what he would have done next. But yes, this, it's a risk we are going to have to deal with again. We are, however, fortunate that Hera's tag has provided us with incredible data. So when she left Thorny Bush, she traveled a similar route to Royal Wasi, but she stuck closer to the coast, and she reached Somalia in 11 days. So she took a bit longer, probably enjoying the view as one should. She then spent the next 27 days in Somalia, slowly making her way to the Horn of Africa. So just to emphasize and go back to, identifying staging or stopover sites, Hera spending, as well as Royal Wasi, spending so long in Somalia really emphasizes the country as an important stopover site for them to continue their journey. And when we look at the rest of her journey, it just reaffirms why. And this October, we celebrated World Migratory Bird Day. It's an annual event taking place in May and October. And the theme this year was the interconnectedness of a healthy insect population and the survival of migratory birds. So again, not only is Somalia an incredibly important stopover site, but it's incredibly vital to ensure that the insect population in Somalia is very healthy. So once she got to the Horn of Africa, Hera did 2 ocean crossings in just 3 days. So she traveled over 3,500 kilometers. So she crossed the Arabian Sea to get to Oman. In less than 24 hours, she crossed the ocean again to get to the coast of Pakistan. So again, she really needed to build up her energy to do 2 ocean crossings in only 3 days. And out of interest, and also just to see how incredible these birds are. So their tracker has the ability to measure the altitude at which they're flying. So specifically between Pakistan and Afghanistan, Hera was traveling at an altitude between just under 700 or 800 meters and 3.5 kilometers, which is just phenomenal. I mean, how do these birds survive flying that high? So once she got to Pakistan, she traveled straight through to Afghanistan, where she spent a week getting closer to her breeding site. Once she got to the border, she was moving between Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan for about a week. Once she got to Uzbekistan, she settled there. And referring to the satellite map in the corner, she spent 72 days there to breed. So all those little dots we can infer is her breeding territory. It's generally a 5-kilometer radius from the breeding cavity. And speaking to the BirdLife partner there, they confirmed that it's an area with many clay cliffs, and European rollers is one of the species that is known to breed in that area. So having a quick look at the breeding behavior of European rollers, they're socially monogamous and secondary obligate breeders, which means they don't build their own nests. They're very reliant on other species building nests, which they can take over. And the research that they've done in Europe has found that they prefer green woodpecker nests. And with her being socially monogamous, so either she would have had she has a lifelong partner, or she's only monogamous during that breeding cycle. Right, so where is Hera now? Everybody's favorite question. So when she completed her breeding cycle in Uzbekistan, she traveled to India, of all places. That's not something that we had thought she would do. From the 29th of July, she's been in India. Her tracker has been, or the GPS locations that we've been getting has been temperamental. We can understand it being temperamental during her breeding cycle. She would have been incubating in the cavity. And how the tracker works, it continuously is sending signals, and the satellite has to orbit where she is to save that location. So she might have been outside of the cavity or inside the cavity when the tracker or satellite was orbiting, so we might not have gotten as many regular transmissions. But since leaving Uzbekistan, we would have assumed that we would be getting regular updates, because she wouldn't be breeding, she wouldn't be in the shade, she would be very active hunting, building up her energy before migrating back south. However, that's not been the case. And speaking to the manufacturer as well as the partners in Europe, we assume that, Hera would have molted and in a breeding site, that the new feathers have grown over part of the solar panel, because the tracker actually has a little voltage reader. And we can see that the reading is very low. It's very close to the cutoff point, because there's a little mechanism in the tracker which shuts the battery down if the voltage is too low, to save the charging capacity. So, there's nothing we can do about it now. We just hope that with her migrating back, the feathers would shift to allow the solar panel to get some charge, so that we can get more frequent submissions or transmissions. But where she is now, and speaking to the BirdLife partner in India, she's currently in an area in Gajarut, where they do annual European roller counts, over 100 birders for 2 days. And phenomenally, last year's survey suggested an estimated over 300,000 European rollers in that area, which is just incredible. I can't even imagine so many birds. So, the BirdLife partner, they mobilized a lot of birders to try go find Hera, but it must have been extremely difficult trying to find an individual in, thousands of other European rollers. So we're just hoping, the last transmission was the 29th of September, and we're just hoping, we assume she might have started migrating already. So we're just hoping that we get a few more updates before she actually arrives in South Africa, to see if she firstly is going to arrive back in Thornybush, where we trapped her. And when she does arrive back, we'll have to figure out a plan to re-trap her and to see if we can attach anything to the tag to almost force the feathers to, grow against the body instead of over the solar panel. So again, a massive learning curve. So, what are we actually trying to achieve with this research? So just to reiterate, we know both subspecies that are found in South Africa are declining. There's skewed research at the breeding sites. We have very little understanding of the overwintering population in South Africa. And we know that for holistic conservation intervention, a thorough understanding of the entire life cycle is required. And we are in this position where we are host to the subspecies Seminawi. And because there is a lack of data, we can supplement that research. So going back to the knowledge gaps that I referred to previously, with the ground monitoring and understanding what is happening to the population, by counting the individuals we see, we are able to inform the red list database. So currently, we've just finalized it this year, and they are still listed as near threatened. Globally, they're least concerned, but in South Africa, they are near threatened. But if the population continues to decline, maybe we'll have to uplist that species. But the only way we can really do that is by doing the ground monitoring and counting the population that is found in South Africa. Because the red list database also infers conservation interventions. The second thing that the ground monitoring will feed into is by understanding or making sure that the preferred habitat is protected and that enough of it is protected, and to also model how climate change is going to influence that preference. The migration monitoring will be able to really understand which routes these birds fly, to know which BirdLife partners and other conservation organizations we need to work with to improve the conservation status of the species, to understand which stopover sites are used. So referring back to Somalia, we need to understand, are those sites protected? What is the quality of those sites? What threats do they encounter in those sites by working with the partner on the ground? And can those threats be mitigated? And then, the third thing that we found, which we're thrilled about, is using the migration and all the maps that we're able to produce as an ambassador for other migratory species. So what's next for the project? So we need to ring 48 individuals next season. It's going to be a big challenge depending on the population size this season, but we're going to be starting earlier. So as soon as the concentration is in South Africa, we'll start trapping in different areas depending on our permits. We'll aim to deploy 5 more tags in February of next year. We'll continue to expand the transect monitoring in key areas. So we're very reliant on stakeholders to help us with the monitoring. Annually, I go to Kruger and do the transect monitoring in Kruger, but all the other private protected areas, we are reliant on, the managers or the guides to do the monitoring for us. And then based on the research that we collect and the data, we'll aim to publish those findings and feed it into the Flyway action plan that I referred to previously. Being reliant on citizen scientists, it's always important to understand how you can help. And there are various mechanisms, the biggest one being crowdfunding, getting a bunch of friends together to buy a tag. You get naming rights and direct access to the monitoring data. So you don't have to wait for us to update you or to see any posts on social media. You can just log in and see where is Hera or alike. You can also just donate to the project, which goes towards the monitoring that I do in Kruger and other areas. Or if you are fortunate enough to live in an area where European enrollers occur and you are happy to partake in the transect point count monitoring, which uses BirdLife, then please get in touch. We are very dependent on, like I said, on you guys helping us do that. And then just with engagement, talking about the project, almost being an ambassador for European rollers and other migratory species, just contributes to expanding the awareness of what we're trying to achieve here and how you can help as a citizen. So yeah, just a recap on the project. Hera, just one way, she traveled over 10,000 kilometers. She took 2 months, just 2 months to get to Uzbekistan to breed. It's going to be fascinating to see when she starts migrating back, hopefully when we get a GPS location. And what will also be interesting is to see, will she use the same flyway? Will she use the same stopover sites that she used on her way to the Northern Hemisphere? And will she actually return back to her wintering grounds in South Africa? Because that's something we don't actually know. We know that they generally return to their same breeding grounds year after year, but we have no idea if they return to the same sites when they winter in South Africa. So yeah, thank you so much, and I'm excited for all the questions that will follow.
Jess, that was phenomenal. Really, 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 it was phenomenal. And yeah, I mean, you probably get, told congratulations, daily by, stakeholders and staff members, but well done. What you're doing is phenomenal. And I absolutely love how the project has taken just one bird, one single bird, and used it as a vessel for conservation of a greater migratory route, which has no borders. It has no passport control. It has no customs. These birds don't understand those concepts. Those are all concepts that we have come up with as humans. And that's just one of the remarkable things about birds, isn't it? And migration is that these birds they really just don't care, because for them, they know where they need to breed and they're going to get there come hell or high water, and they know when they need to come and enjoy a low-felt holiday, as we all do. And, at the end of the day, they know what's going on, and it's simply remarkable. And I think Hera has become a conservation wildlife warrior herself. And she may never, yeah.
Yeah, no, she really has. Thank you, John. I mean, I'm just thrilled that people are loving the project and taking such an interest. I mean, I don't think we expected it to grow as much as it did, or for people to be so fond of the work we're doing. Like you said, it is, I guess it's like the participants or those listening, they're coming from all over the world, where your birds are really connecting us, or migratory birds are really connecting us and showing us that we need to think beyond our borders. And the Flyway-wide approach, although it's difficult, it looks good on paper or easy on paper, but there are various challenges and, countries and it's difficult working across borders, but it's exciting to be able to work with our partners in the Northern Hemisphere and to really connect the work that we're trying to do here with the work that they're doing in the breeding sites. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see where Hera goes next.
It's amazing. And I think everybody, all the birders here, all the people, attending are sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting for that next update on bated breath. And some really interesting questions coming in here, Jess. And between, if you can't answer it, then, we'll see what we can do. Otherwise, if we don't get around to your questions, everybody, so please, continue sending them through in the Q&A box, because if we don't get around to answering the questions, we will do our best to try and get back to you. So, and we'll post Jess's email address as well, so that people can get into contact with her and find out more information. But I think there's a couple of questions here, Jess, insofar as the cost involved in terms of these trackers is concerned. What is the cost? Because it sounds like, people have now got their ears pricked. You've mentioned the fact that they may be able to name the next Hera, and all of a sudden, birders have become excited. So what is the cost involved? Is it going to set us back a couple of chappies, or what exactly is involved in the process?
Yeah, it's going to be a bit more than a few chappies. And good luck beating, the suitable name like Hera. But a tag, so it's from a manufacturer in Lowtech, in New Zealand called Lowtech. So one tag costs 53,000 Rand, just the tag alone. And then because it's linked to a satellite system, Argos, it's a French company, but we have an office in Cape Town. We are charged per transmission, of per GPS location. And that we generally aim for 2 years, and that costs about 33,000 Rand per tag. So yeah, you're looking at average 80,000 Rand per tag.
Goodness gracious me.
But you get to name the individual and see where they go. I should almost charge per question. Maybe that's the fundraising scheme.
In the bigger scheme of things, that kind of money is actually, and some people might think and sit, at home on their seats and think that what I'm about to say is absurd. But in the bigger scheme of things, it's actually not that much. If you look at the value of the data that's coming out of the work that you're busy doing, it's invaluable. It's data and findings that are going to last generations. It's setting a precedent in terms of this specific flyway. And somebody has to do it. So the fact that you are, on behalf of BirdLife South Africa and our organization, is, grabbing the figurative roller by the non-existent horns is just phenomenal, because it's now allowing us insight into what we need to do. And like one of your slides said as well, that we need this data in order to properly plan conservation intervention. And one of the issues, and I see people are asking it here as well. Again, everybody, if I don't specifically mention your individual names, I do apologize. I'm just, for the interest of time, trying to lump some of these very similar questions into one. But some people are asking here, what exactly are the threats? I mean, obviously, we've now highlighted food availability and sort of the loss of natural habitats. But I also know that there was a figure released by BirdLife International not so long ago, perhaps maybe 5 to 8 years ago. And that figure said that 25 million birds are killed across the East Asian, the sort of Africa East Asia migratory pathway every single year.
Yeah, so and I actually had that slide, then I removed it. But that's a good question. And it is important for us to understand the threats that they face throughout their entire life cycle. So the research that they've done in their breeding grounds, they found that habitat change is the biggest threat, because it's resulted in loss of suitable breeding sites, which is why they've put up these artificial nest boxes to encourage them to use it. Because, they're removing old trees or cavities that they used to use. The second one is homogeneous habitat. So, that influences their habitat preferences, where they find insects. The third one is climate change. So it's getting hotter where they would prefer to breed. So they're having to shift to less suitable habitat, and that's having an influence on their fitness. Insecticide use. So those who listen to Lorinda's talk would know the work we're doing at BirdLife South Africa to understand just what, insecticide and pesticide use is having on birds. We really don't know enough, but we know it is having an impact. And then loss of resources, so food. So it's very apt that, the theme for World Migratory Bird Day was the importance of insects. And then the third is actually electrocution and roadkill, because of the way that they hunt. That is a threat and something we need to increase our monitoring for.
Yeah, and it's one thing that these birds are covering these distances and fighting the natural elements. It's another thing when they need to contend with a lot more. I think it all just really culminates in making this entire sort of concept of migration, specifically with regards to these birds traveling these long distances, and not sort of local migration, but specifically the ones crossing countries, and it just makes it that much more of an accomplishment every single time. That's amazing. On the topic of crossing borders, I think people have picked up the fact that these birds are flying over war-torn areas. And two questions have come out of it, is that do these birds get impacted necessarily by the wars that may be going on, and sort of disputes between countries, or perhaps civil wars, and if so, specifically with regards to GPS signals in those countries. A lot of those countries, because of the war situations that are going on, perhaps there's GPS blockers that have been put in place. Do you think this may sort of impact on the data that's collected, and also the birds on their migratory routes?
Yeah, so that's a very relevant question. And they actually did a study last year where they found, it was specifically on raptors, where they found that raptors, I mean, we don't understand how they are actually aware of what's happening on the ground, flying so high up, but they knew of the war that was happening um, in Russia, and they actually diverted their route to avoid that area, which is fine. They would be safer, but that has a cost to their fitness. So now they're having to fly over an area that they wouldn't necessarily know. They wouldn't know where to find resources. Maybe there are less resources in that area. So if that happens frequently, that would force the birds to fly a longer distance, which would have an influence or impact on their success rate to complete the migration route. And in terms of the blockers, well, that study didn't find that, but that is something that could happen. But I don't think it would, because Argos, it's an independent satellite system. So I wouldn't know if a country could actually block or intercept those transmissions.
Okay,
But
yeah.
it is something that we're going to have to, continue monitoring.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously when you drop that figure in terms of costs with regards to the tracker, there's a flood of questions that have come in insofar as the development of technology is concerned, and the bright young minds of university students, and potentially people who have sufficient amounts of extra time on their hands to devote to developing something more cost friendly. Is there something like that in the works, or are we kind of limited to the devices that we're using at the moment, or is there scope for further developmental input going forward?
There is scope, and you do see new manufacturers popping up. There's always just the risk if it's a new company. How effective are those trackers? Which system do they use? Trackers now deploy Bluetooth transmission, which is much cheaper. You just have to be in range, but there are different risks associated to that. So if the individual doesn't return home, you've lost that data. They also have to return back to the same site so that you can be in range of that individual to download their route that they flew. But yeah, we are dependent on those university minds or eager individuals to undertake a project like that. I guess, there are startup fees involved. So that's why I guess you just see the current tag manufacturers looking at developing cheaper or smaller tags. Yeah. I think, at the moment, it really just is expensive because we are limited to size. So it has to be solar powered. So, because battery adds weight. So I think it's the solar power mechanism that really does make it expensive.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And Jess, insofar as the actual device is concerned, people are obviously wondering in terms of the impact that it may have on a bird. Do you think, I mean, we wouldn't be doing this really, would we, if it had a negative impact on these birds? Because, yes, data and science is important and all, but in the same breath, we aren't in the prehistoric days where we walk outside with a gun and we shoot a specimen and get data on that. Times have
Right.
changed. And I feel like we wouldn't be doing this if it was doing the bird an injustice.
No, definitely. And also a valid question, and something that BirdLife South Africa doesn't take lightly. We specifically have a animal research ethics committee with external committee members that review your application and advises you how to ensure that the research is ethical. And I did mention that we align ourselves to only deploying something that weighs 3% or less of the body mass, because we're trying to conserve the species, and we don't want to influence its fitness during its migration. That's counterintuitive. Then we're just wasting our money. We don't want to kill the bird en route. So we are very aware of the ethical implications, but like I said, we also are in a privileged position where our European roller or our European partners have done a lot of studies to ensure that trackers, as long as they've been attached the right way, which is why we only use very experienced ringers and have a wildlife vet on site. As long as you align with those guidelines, you're not going to have a detrimental impact on the bird. So we are positive that we're not having a detrimental impact on the individual. And with Hera continuing her breeding and flying 10,000 kilometers, she wouldn't have done that if the tracker really is influencing her flights.
Okay. No, well, I think that's reassuring for a lot of the listeners this evening. And yeah, I mean, it really does make sense. So, we've come a long way since how things were done in the past. And I think now more than ever, we find ourselves in times where we are confident in knowing that there is no impact. And if perhaps there is, it's certainly one that's not detrimental to the bird and its journey and how it would go about its normal day-to-day lives. There's just one question here, and perhaps, I mean, it's something that many, or perhaps one or two, or a couple of the participants might be wondering, the difference between a migrant and an endemic. So an endemic, Jess, if you mind, I'll quickly answer that one. An endemic bird, ladies and gentlemen, is essentially a bird that one can only find in one specific country, or perhaps biome or region. So it's endemic. It can only be found in that specific region. Then what we have is migrants, so birds that will migrate across migratory bird routes, be it South Africa, somewhere into the Palearctic, so continental Europe, Russia, Asia, etc., and vice versa to and from. And those we refer to as Palearctic migrants. They migrate across the oceans and from Africa and into continental Europe and East and Asia. We also then get what we call intra-African migrants, and those are birds whose migration routes are restricted to within the continent of Africa. And they will spend their summers in the Kruger National Park and then head off to Uganda and the DRC for a lavishly warm winter. So that is the difference between migrants and endemics. And I think another one that I wanted to raise with you here quickly, Jess, before we, there it is, before we have to bid everybody farewell, is the name Hera and Royal Wasi.
Oh.
So obviously everybody, donors and stakeholders perhaps were able to name these two individuals. But what exactly led to the name Hera? Because you also made reference to it, that you struggle to see how somebody might come across a much better name than the name Hera. So what is the meaning behind the name Hera?
Yeah, so the donor chose that name, and it's a part of the Greek mythology, and means goddess of the sky, which I think is so appropriate and which is going to be hard to beat. And we were lucky that she was confirmed a female, because from the start I was just referring to her as a female, so we got very lucky there. And then Royal Wasi, uh, Wasi is the Shangaan word for blue, so it makes reference to the iridescent color, the beautiful color when they take flight. Yeah, and royal because of the lodge, where we trapped them, Royal Mother One. They named that individual. Yes.
That's amazing. And yeah, I think Goddess of the Sky. It's very special. It's very,
So
very
appropriate.
yeah, no, it's really
Yeah.
special. But you know what? It's a challenge. It is a challenge that has been laid. You have not seen it anywhere else, ladies and gents, besides here this evening on this episode of Conservation Conversations. Dare we say somebody out there may be able to name the next batch of European rollers a better name? And the challenge is there. And if you want to get into contact with Jess and how to go about doing that, please head over to the BirdLife South Africa website. Jess, your email address is jess.wilmot@birdlife.org.za.
Jessica.
Jessica.
My
Yeah,
formal name. Mm.
perfect. So
Yes.
jessica.wilmot@birdlife.org.za. Her contact details are
Yes.
on our Facebook page. And I think what's also very cool is that if you want to sort of support Jess and her project in some very small way as well, you can head over to our BirdLife South Africa shop for the birds. There's a limited edition Hera, Where in the World is Hera
Mm.
badge. So you can walk
Mm.
around with your very own Hera situated on your lapel and
Very own. Yeah.
preach the
Almost
word.
take her on her own migration, on a
There we
different
go.
migration.
Even if that migration might not be exciting and includes southern Johannesburg. Uh, it's it's still embracing migration at its best. So yeah, everybody make sure that you head over to the shop for the birds and get yourself a Hera as well. For those whose questions we were unable to answer, we will certainly try to do so. From myself and Jess and the rest of the BirdLife South Africa team, have a wonderful evening. If you're in Johannesburg and on the rainy and wet roads, please travel safely. And until the next episode of Conservation Conversations, goodbye from us for now.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.